Hi, Anne-Marie.
Hello, friend.
How are you?
I'm well. It's been all of 12 seconds because we just got off of a training with attorneys, which is what's compelling this dialogue this afternoon. We do
Correct.
an enormous amount of work with attorneys. We teach storytelling for the modern attorney. And one of the things that is most frequently thought is that really storytelling is exclusive for litigators. That's who, it's the domain of the litigator. And we really challenge that notion quite aggressively. Holly does a superb job teaching legal writing and storytelling, but there are also a multitude of ways in which you can apply storytelling as an attorney. So I wonder if you could start by addressing that.
Yeah, totally. So I think that there's this misconception that storytelling is just something that's the purview of litigators. And while certainly obviously there is a place for storytelling when you're in front of a jury, in front of a judge, I would also say that very few attorneys are actually like in front of judges these days. I mean, certainly now with court closures, like nobody is really physically in front of a jury. But so few cases go to trial, right? So you have to think about this as a really incremental process from the beginning of a representation of a client. How am I infusing story into every interaction I have with anyone with whom I interact with on the case? And that can be within your own firm, right? With associates, paralegals, assistants, that kind of thing. So everybody's speaking the same language and the same story about the client. To, if you are a litigator, obviously working with the opposing counsel, doing the motion work, that kind of thing, you never want to pass up an opportunity to infuse whatever motion practice or oral argument you have with story. But if you're not a litigator, you still should be doing this, right? So if you're a transactional attorney, let's say you're a land use attorney, you are more likely than not going to be interfacing with even more disparate groups than if you were just a litigator, right? So you're probably talking to people within a city or a municipal or state local agency. You're trying to move and persuade those folks. And that could be someone as simple as like getting someone you need to get you records so you can do whatever, incremental piece of work you need to do to move your project along, to work, talking to someone at a very high level within that agency. Also, you're probably going to be talking to opposing groups who don't want your project to go forward. So how are you telling the story of what your client wants to do in a way that's going to move and transform and influence and sort of make people think, I wonder what else there is to that, right? And also, I think in law firms, this is something that you and I have talked about quite a bit. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to harness storytelling to improve and transform law firm culture. Having worked in law firms, having been, being surrounded, as I know you are, by clients who are attorneys, friends who are attorneys, I think definitely this is an area where storytelling can improve recruitment and retention rates for all types of people, for women, for people of color, for underrepresented groups. And we do a lot of training, of course, about how you can use storytelling to improve feedback and to improve outcomes within a culture. I think that's incredibly, incredibly important. So you can use this in all of these different buckets.
Yeah, it's a really dynamic tool. And I think what I would say is if you're watching this and you're an attorney, think about all the audiences you are trying to influence. Mm-hmm. Whether those audiences are internal, they're other partners, they're other colleagues. The land use example is an excellent one. You have lots of different groups that may be in opposition to your project. And how are you trying to move and influence those people? Business development is a huge area that we use storytelling with attorneys, because at the end of the day, your process of being a passionate advocate for your client is not a distinguishing factor. That
Right.
means nothing. I mean, everybody is advocating for their client, or what the hell are you doing? Of course you're doing that. That's your job, by the way. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit also about how we talk about storytelling for law firms in terms of a public relations lens.
Yeah. Totally. So I think, we are in a very crowded marketplace of ideas, right? Everybody's a content creator. You have your own channels, so like your website, your blog, your social media, and everybody has this, right? This is like standard operating procedure for any law firm, large, small, solo, whatever. So the issue becomes like, how are you actually standing out and becoming memorable? Like, what's your shiny bauble? What's the thing that sets you apart? Frequently when we work with law firms, when we start out, they'll have some like really frankly kind of like tired marketing tagline that involves them being like zealous advocates. I'm sorry, what does that mean? Everybody is like, if you're a litigator, of course you're zealously advocating for your clients. Like that's sort of like the floor,
Yeah,
So
Sure.
the question that we always ask is kind of why, how? Give me an example. What was the last client that you worked with that, in which you had a remarkable outcome, right? What was a problem that you solved? And frequently, even then, it's like this process of us really having to zoom in tightly. We'll get responses that are like, oh, we had a client, we represented a class of plaintiffs and it was a $580 million settlement. Like, great. What does that mean? What is special? What is unique? What is interesting about that particular case, right? Like who are the humans behind it? Because I think a lot of the times too, especially if you're a lawyer in a high volume, high turnover, in terms of your caseload environment, they all kind of start to bleed together. But remember, at the heart of every legal matter is a person, even if it's a big company, like it's comprised of a bunch of people, right?
Right. And I would just say, to tag on to that, because I don't want people under the impression that we only work with massive firms.
Right.
I'm working with a solopreneur right now, like a solo practice person right now, just looking at how do you increase conversion rates? How do you make that intake process more of a humanizing opportunity to bond and move with somebody versus just talking about your process and what you do. That's not enough. And we just talked about this in our training. We talk about this in every training. There's this distinguishing factor between showing and telling. So telling somebody is to say, this is the example I always use, is she is kind and generous. Versus that's telling, that's great, but it's much more compelling to say she had $40 in her pocket and gave me 20.
Absolutely.
That tells you everything about that person in a more humanizing, emotionally moving way. And we don't have time today to go over sort of the three-legged stool of influence and how it works to move people. But if you're just operating from a fact pattern, you're in fact working against rather than with human nature. So we really want you to think about storytelling in a more expansive way if you're an attorney, regardless of your practice area. We assure you there is a multitude of ways to use storytelling to make you a better attorney, a better revenue generator, and a better leader.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anne Marie. It was so good to chat about this with you. I'm so passionate about this, given my background. So we would love to hear feedback from anybody who's watching as to, what other questions you have about how lawyers can be more effective storytellers. Have a great day. Till next time. Bye.
Bye.